Ravi was a simple man who loved peace more than noise. He lived in a small town where the streets were clean, the houses were neat, and every yard looked almost the same because of strict rules made by the Homeowners Association. People called it the HOA. Most residents followed those rules without question, but Ravi never liked the idea of someone telling him how he could enjoy his own home or his own town. Still, he kept quiet and lived a calm life. One of Ravi's favorite places was the lake on the edge of the community. The water stretched wide like a mirror, shining in the morning sun. As a boy, Ravi had walked there with his father, carrying a simple fishing rod made of bamboo. His father had told him that the lake was a gift from nature, and that anyone could find peace by sitting near its calm surface. Those words stayed in Ravi's heart, and even now, as an adult, he returned to the same place whenever life felt heavy on his shoulders. One bright morning in early summer, Ravi carried his fishing rod and a small box of bait. The air was cool, and the first rays of sunlight touched the leaves. Birds sang in the trees, and the smell of fresh grass filled the air. He walked down the trail that led to the water and chose a quiet spot near a flat rock. He sat, threw his line into the lake, and closed his eyes for a while. Time passed slowly, the way Ravi liked it. The water moved gently. He caught 2 small fish, but he was not a man who measured joy by numbers. For him, fishing was about silence and thought. He packed his things after a few hours, stretched his arms, and smiled at the sky. When he reached his car, his smile disappeared. A white envelope was pressed under the windshield wiper. At first, Ravi thought it was an advertisement or a notice about street cleaning, but when he opened it, he froze. Inside was a fine letter from the HOA. The words on the paper made his chest tighten. The fine said $3,500. The reason written was fishing without license. Ravi read the letter twice, then a third time. He could not believe it. $3,500 for catching 2 small fish? He laughed at first, thinking it had to be a mistake. But the numbers were clear, and the rules quoted in the letter made his heart sink. The next day, Ravi decided to visit the HOA office to clear the mistake. The office was a plain building near the main road, with neat windows and a small flag by the door. Inside, a woman with straight hair sat at a desk typing. She looked up when Ravi entered. "Good morning," she said in a polite but cold tone. "Good morning," Ravi answered, holding the paper. "I received this fine yesterday. It says I must pay $3,500 for fishing. I believe there is some mistake. I live here. I have lived here for many years, and I did not know there was any special rule against fishing." The woman typed something again, then checked her screen. "According to our records, you do not have a fishing license," she said flatly. "Fishing in the lake requires a license, and the penalty for breaking this rule is $3,500. It is written clearly in the HOA guidelines." Ravi frowned. "But I never saw such a rule before. I have fished here many times and nobody told me. Why is the fine so high? This is more than a month of my earnings." "The amount is meant to discourage residents from breaking the rules again," the woman replied. "You must pay within 30 days. If you do not pay, the fine will be added to your property fees." Ravi left the office with heavy steps. His hands shook as he held the letter. It felt unfair. The lake had always been there long before the HOA came into power. How could they suddenly claim ownership of it and punish him for doing something so harmless? That evening, Ravi sat at his dining table staring at the letter. He thought of ignoring it, but the words in bold letters warned him that failure to pay could lead to extra charges. The HOA could even put a lien on his home if he refused. The thought of losing his house for fishing made his stomach twist. He decided to talk to his neighbors. Perhaps they felt the same way. The first person he spoke with was an older man named Kiran. He listened to Ravi's story, shook his head slowly, and said, "I am sorry, but the HOA always wins. I once tried to argue when they fined me for planting a tree too close to the road. It only got worse. If you fight them, they double down. My advice is simple: just pay and move on." Another neighbor, a woman named Meena, sighed when Ravi showed her the fine. They fined me last year because my fence was 2 inches taller than allowed, she said. They have power, Ravi. No matter how unfair it feels, they do not care about fairness, they care about control. Ravi listened, but he was not satisfied. He was not a man who liked to bend when he knew something was wrong. That night he sat by his window, looking out at the dark outline of the lake. His mind kept turning. The HOA claimed to own the lake, but did they really own it? Who owned the water, the land, and the dam at the far end? The thought grew stronger. The next morning, Ravi went to the county records office. He asked for property documents about the lake and surrounding land. A clerk searched through files and finally handed him a heavy folder. Ravi sat at a wooden table and opened it. The papers were thick and filled with details, but as Ravi read carefully, something caught his attention. The HOA did not own the lake itself. They had authority over the land around it, but the water and the dam were owned by a private company. That company had leased the dam for many years, but the lease was coming to an end soon. Even more interesting, the company was planning to sell its rights. Ravi's heart began to beat faster. He felt like he had found a hidden key. If the dam controlled the water, then the person who owned the dam had real power. Without water, the lake would shrink, the grass would dry, and the community would suffer. The HOA could write as many rules as they wanted, but water was life. That night, Ravi could hardly sleep. He walked around his room, thinking. The fine had made him angry, but now he felt something else too. A fire of determination. The HOA believed they controlled everything, but maybe they did not. Maybe he could show them that nature and power did not always belong to those who wrote the rules. He whispered to himself as he looked out at the stars. If they believe they can find me for fishing, let us see what happens when I own the water they need. And with that thought, Ravi's plan began. Ravi woke early the next morning with a clear thought in his mind. He had discovered something important, and it gave him both energy and courage. The Homeowners Association had fined him $3,500 for fishing, but in the county records, he had seen the truth. The HOA did not own the water. They did not own the dam. They only managed the land around the lake. The real power was in the dam, and the company that held the rights to it was ready to sell. Ravi knew this was not going to be simple. Buying a dam was not like buying groceries. It would cost money and it would require serious steps. But his heart told him this was the right path. He could pay the fine, but that would mean bowing down to unfair rules. Or he could rise, take control, and change the balance of power in the community forever. That morning, Ravi visited his old friend Arun, who worked as a lawyer in the town. Arun was a kind man with a sharp mind, and Ravi trusted him. They sat in Arun's small office surrounded by books and papers. "Tell me clearly," Ravi said, placing the county file on the desk. "Can a person buy the dam? Is it possible?" Arun adjusted his glasses and read through the file. After a while, he nodded. "Yes, it is possible. The company that owns it is small. They built the dam decades ago, and now they want to sell because the cost of maintenance is high. If you make them an offer, they may accept. The HOA has no control over this. They cannot stop you." Ravi leaned forward. "And if I buy it, what happens?" Arun gave a small smile. "If you buy it, you control the flow of water. That means you decide how much water the lake and the community receive. It is a strong position to be in. But Ravi, I must warn you. This is not just about money. This is about responsibility. If you own the dam, you are in charge of the water supply. Are you ready for that?" Ravi nodded slowly. "Yes, I am ready. They fined me unfairly. They think they can control everything. I want to show them that they cannot." Arun closed the file and said, "Then the first step is to speak to the company and ask their price." The very next day, Ravi drove to the nearby city where the company had its office. It was an old building with cracked walls. Inside, he met the manager, a man named Patel. "You are interested in the dam?" Patel asked with surprise after Ravi explained his reason for coming. "Yes," Ravi replied calmly. "I want to know if you are ready to sell, and if so, what the cost would be." Patel rubbed his chin and thought for a moment. "We are indeed planning to sell. The dam is old, and we do not wish to maintain it any longer. Our asking price is not small. It is $150,000. Ravi felt his chest tighten. That was a large amount. He did not have so much money sitting in his bank. But he kept his voice steady. "I understand. Let me think about it, and I will return soon with an answer. For the next week, Ravi's life was filled with numbers. He checked his savings, thought about selling a small piece of land he owned outside town, and even spoke to the bank about a loan. The bank manager, after hearing his plan, raised an eyebrow. You want to buy a dam? That is unusual, but if the property is real and the rights are legal, we can support you with a loan. You must, however, show proof of income and make regular payments. Ravi signed the forms and gave his documents. He also sold his small piece of land to add to his savings. Slowly, the money began to come together. It was not easy, and there were many sleepless nights, but his determination never faded. Every time he thought of the fine letter from the HOA, his resolve grew stronger. One evening, after a long day of paperwork, Ravi walked to the lake again. He looked at the water shining under the moonlight. Children were playing near the shore, and families were walking along the path. He thought about how the HOA claimed ownership of this view, yet the real truth lay hidden behind papers and rights. Soon, if all went well, the water itself would belong to him. Finally, after 2 weeks of effort, Ravi signed the deal with Patel's company. The documents were stamped, the money was transferred, and the rights to the dam were now his. He stood outside the office with the file in his hands, feeling a strange mix of relief and power. For the first time, he was no longer just a resident under the control of the HOA. He was the owner of the dam, the gatekeeper of the water. Aaron congratulated him when he brought the news. You have done something bold, Ravi, but now you must be careful. You hold power, but use it wisely. If you close the water completely, people will suffer. If you give too much, the HOA will not feel your strength. You must find balance. Ravi listened, but deep inside he wanted the HOA to feel the weight of what they had done. They had treated him like a rule breaker for sitting by the lake and fishing quietly. They had fined him more money than he could afford. Now it was time to show them that power could change hands. A week later, the HOA sent him another notice reminding him of the unpaid fine. Ravi read it and smiled. Instead of replying, he drove to the dam. It stood tall and wide, holding back the water that fed the lake and the entire community. The gate controls were simple, with levers and wheels. As he touched the cold metal, he thought about his father's words long ago. That water was a gift of nature. He turned the wheel slightly, reducing the flow of water. Not enough to harm the town immediately, but enough that the level of the lake would begin to drop in the coming days. When residents walked by the lake later that week, they noticed the water level was lower. Grass along the edge began to dry. The HOA called an emergency meeting, confused about what was happening. Ravi attended the meeting quietly, sitting in the back, listening as they argued. The water level is falling, one member said. If this continues, our lawns will dry. The fountains will stop working. We must contact the company that runs the dam. Ravi stood up and cleared his throat. The room fell silent. You do not need to call the company, he said calmly. The dam is mine now. I bought it. I control the water. You fined me for fishing. You treated me unfairly. Now you will see that I also have rules of my own. The members of the HOA stared at him in shock. Some whispered, some gasped. But Ravi stood tall, holding the file of documents in his hand as proof. The game had changed, and everyone in that room knew it. The room was silent after Ravi's words. The members of the HOA looked at each other in disbelief. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others stared at him with open mouths. Ravi stood tall, holding the documents that proved the truth. The dam, the water, the very heart of the community's supply. He owned it now. One of the HOA members, a man named Suresh, finally spoke. This cannot be true. The dam belongs to a company. It has for years. Ravi walked forward and placed the file on the table. Not anymore, he said calmly. I bought it. The papers are signed, sealed, and legal. The dam is mine. The head of the HOA, a stern woman named Kamala, adjusted her glasses and flipped through the documents. Her eyes widened, but her voice tried to remain steady. Even if this is true, you must understand that the community depends on that water. You cannot simply do what you want with it. Ravi crossed his arms. And yet you did what you wanted with me. You fined me $3,500 for fishing at the lake, something I have done since I was a boy. You did not care how unfair it was. Now you must learn what it feels like when power is not on your side. The room filled with murmurs. Some members whispered angrily. Others looked nervous. Kamala slammed her hand on the table. You cannot use the dam as a weapon. This is childish, Ravi met her eyes. Childish is charging a man thousands of dollars for catching 2 small fish. Childish is pretending that rules are more important than fairness. You wanted control. Now you will taste what real control means. With that, he picked up his papers and walked out, leaving the members in stunned silence. The news spread quickly. Within days, everyone in the community knew that Ravi owned the dam. At first, people thought it was a rumor. But when the water pressure in their taps began to weaken and the fountains in the park started to sputter, they realized it was true. The water levels in the lake dropped further, and the green grass around the edges turned brown. Some neighbors supported Ravi quietly. They whispered to him in the street, "You are brave. You stood up to them. We all wanted to, but we never dared." Others, however, glared at him when he passed. They blamed him for their drying lawns and shrinking flower beds. The HOA called another emergency meeting. Ravi was invited, but this time he did not attend. He wanted them to feel powerless, just as he had felt when he stood in their office begging for fairness. Inside the meeting hall, voices rose in anger. "Our water bills are high, yet we have no water," shouted one resident. Kamala tried to calm them, but her own voice shook with frustration. "We are dealing with a difficult situation. We will find a solution." "What solution?" another man asked. "He owns the dam. You let him walk out of here with all the power. What are you going to do now?" The HOA sent a letter to Ravi, asking for a private discussion. He read it and set it aside. Then they sent another letter, this time threatening legal action. Ravi smiled as he read it, because he knew the law was on his side. He had bought the dam fairly with proper documents. They could not take it away. Meanwhile, the lake continued to shrink. The ducks that once swam happily near the shore now waddled on the mud. Children who once played near the water stayed home. Families who loved evening walks complained about the smell as plants dried. The pressure grew, and finally Kamala herself came to Ravi's house. She stood at his door, her face tight with anger. Ravi opened the door and looked at her calmly. "We need to talk," she said. "About the fine?" Ravi asked. She hesitated. "About the water. You are hurting everyone, not just us." Ravi stepped aside and let her in. She sat stiffly on a chair while he poured her a glass of water from his own supply. She did not drink it. "You cannot keep this up," she said firmly. "You are punishing families, children, elderly people. If you continue, you will turn the whole town against you." Ravi sat across from her. "And did you think of families when you fined me $3,500 for fishing? Did you think of fairness when you called me a rule breaker? You had power, and you used it without mercy. Now I have power. I want you to understand what it feels like." Kamala's voice softened, but only a little. "What do you want, Ravi? Tell me directly." Ravi leaned forward. "I want the fine canceled. I want a written apology from the HOA, admitting that what you did was unfair. And I want new rules. Rules that respect people instead of crushing them with punishment." Kamala's face tightened. "You are asking for too much." Ravi shook his head. "I am asking for justice. Until then, the water flow will remain as it is. Lowered." She left without another word. In the days that followed, tension grew stronger. Some people began to knock on Ravi's door, pleading with him to restore the water. Mothers begged for their gardens. Elderly men asked for their lawns. Children asked why they could not play near the lake anymore. Ravi listened patiently, but he stayed firm. Still, a part of him felt heavy. He did not want to hurt ordinary people. His fight was not with them. His fight was with the HOA, but he knew that if he gave in too early, they would never learn. One evening, Aaron visited him again. The lawyer looked at the dry grass outside and sighed. "You have made your point, Ravi. They are shaken. They know they cannot control you. But be careful. If the people turn fully against you, the HOA will use that anger to crush you. You must think of a clever way to end this." Ravi nodded. "I know. I will not keep the water locked forever. But first, I want them to bend. I want them to admit they were wrong." The next morning, the HOA tried another trick. They sent workers to the dam to force open the gates. But when they arrived, Ravi was already there, waiting. He showed them the ownership papers, and they had no choice but to leave. The workers muttered among themselves, realizing the truth. The battle was no longer about rules. It was about pride, power, and respect. Ravi had turned from a quiet resident into the one man who could shake the entire system. As the sun set over the half-empty lake, Ravi stood on the dam and looked at the shrinking water. He felt the weight of responsibility but also the fire of victory. The HOA had thought they could crush him with a fine. Instead, he had turned the tables. The war of water had begun and everyone in town waited to see who would bend first. The days passed and the lake sank lower and lower. The fountain in the park stopped working, leaving behind a dry stone bowl. Lawns once green and fresh turned brown and weak. Flowers bent under the sun without enough water to keep them alive. The community that once looked perfect now showed cracks everywhere. At first, the residents complained loudly at the HOA meetings. They blamed Kamala and her team, asking why they could not fix the problem. The HOA promised action, but each promise failed. They had no control over the dam anymore. Every time they tried to fight Ravi with threats or letters, he stood calmly with his documents, reminding them that the water was his responsibility now. Slowly, the anger of the residents turned from Ravi to the HOA. People began asking questions. Why did you fine him so much in the first place? One woman demanded at a meeting. Why do you make rules that only hurt us? Another man shouted. The meetings that were once full of order now turned into shouting matches. Ravi watched all of this from a distance. He stayed away from the noise, but he listened carefully to the whispers that spread through the town. Some people began to see him as a kind of hero. He stood up to them, they whispered. He is showing them they cannot treat us like slaves to their rules. Others still saw him as the villain who dried up their lawns. But Ravi knew time would reveal the truth. One evening, as he walked near the dam, Ravi met a young boy sitting on a rock. Holding a broken toy boat, the boy looked sad. Ravi sat beside him and asked gently, "What happened?" The boy sighed. "I used to sail my boat in the lake. Now there is not enough water. It gets stuck in the mud." Ravi's heart grew heavy. This was not the fight he wanted. He had no wish to hurt children or simple families. His fight was with the HOA, not with ordinary people who just wanted to live peacefully. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "Do not worry. The water will return. This is only for a short time." That night, Ravi sat by his window thinking deeply. He remembered Aaron's words. If the people turned fully against him, the HOA would use their anger as a weapon. He had made his point. The HOA was cornered. Perhaps now was the time to turn the situation in his favor more directly. The next day, he asked Aaron to meet him at the dam. Together, they walked along the edge, looking at the half-empty lake. "I think it is time," Ravi said softly. "Time for what?" Aaron asked. "Time to set my conditions clearly. If the HOA agrees, I will restore the water. If they refuse, then the people will know exactly who to blame." Aaron nodded. "That is wise. You must show that you are not here to punish families but to demand fairness. If you do it carefully, the people will stand with you, not against you." So Ravi wrote a letter. He addressed it to the HOA board and sent copies to every resident in the community. In it, he explained everything. He told the story of how he had fished at the lake, how he had been fined unfairly, and how he had discovered the truth about the dam. He told them he had bought the dam legally, not to harm the town but to protect himself from the injustice of the HOA. At the end of the letter, he listed his conditions. First, the fine must be canceled. Second, the HOA must write a public apology for treating residents unfairly. Third, new rules must be written with the approval of residents, not only by the HOA board. He ended the letter with a simple line. "When justice is done, the water will return." The letter spread quickly. Neighbors gathered in small groups to read it aloud. Some nodded in agreement, saying, "He is right. These rules are too harsh." Others argued, "But he is holding us hostage." Yet the truth was clear. Ravi had explained himself in plain words, and people could see his side of the story. At the next HOA meeting, the hall was full. Residents carried copies of Ravi's letter in their hands. Kamala and the other board members sat stiffly at the front, trying to look calm, but their faces showed worry. "This has gone too far," one resident shouted. "Cancel his fine." "Apologize to him," another demanded. "We are tired of your rules." Kamala raised her hand to quiet the crowd. "We cannot simply give in to threats," she said, but her words were drowned by the angry voices of the residents. For the first time, the HOA felt true pressure, not from one man, but from the entire community. Later that night, Kamala and two other board members came to Ravi's house. They looked tired and uneasy. Ravi welcomed them inside and waited. Kamala spoke first. "We have read your letter. The residents are angry. They blame us for this situation. We are willing to discuss your demands." Ravi looked at her calmly. "There is nothing to discuss. Cancel the fine. Write the apology. Change the rules. Do this and I will restore the water." One of the board members whispered to Kamala, but she shook her head. Finally, she said, "We will need some time to prepare." "You have 1 week," Ravi replied firmly. "After that, I will reduce the water further. The choice is yours." The board members left in silence. During that week, the situation in the town grew worse. The lake was now so low that the mud cracked under the sun. The playground near the shore looked abandoned. The grass in the parks had turned almost yellow. The residents grew louder in their complaints, and most of their anger was directed at the HOA. By the 6th day, the pressure became too much. The HOA board announced a special meeting for the entire community. Ravi attended this time, standing quietly at the back. Kamala stood at the front with a paper in her hand. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "After much discussion, we have decided to cancel the fine issued to Mr. Ravi. We also extend a public apology for our treatment of him. Furthermore, from this day forward, new community rules will be created with input from residents, not only the board." The hall erupted in noise. Some clapped, others cheered, and a few still muttered in doubt. But most were relieved. For the first time, the HOA had bent its pride. Ravi stepped forward. "I accept the apology. I accept the cancellation. And I promise the water will return." The crowd watched as he held up the keys to the dam. For the first time, Ravi felt both victory and peace. He had not only defended himself, but also forced the HOA to respect the voice of the people. The next morning, Ravi turned the wheel at the dam and restored the flow of water. Slowly, the lake began to rise again. Birds returned, the smell of fresh water filled the air, and children once more played near the shore. Ravi stood by the water, smiling. His fight had never been about revenge. It was about fairness. And now, at last, he had won a victory not just for himself, but for everyone in the community. But deep inside, he also knew one thing. The HOA might have bent this time, but pride is not so easily broken. This story was not yet over. The water flowed back into the lake, filling it day by day. Families came out to watch, smiling as the dry ground disappeared under clear blue water. Children clapped their hands when they saw the fountain in the park come back to life, spraying high into the sky once again. Birds circled overhead, and the community slowly returned to what it once looked like. Ravi stood by the edge, his reflection dancing in the fresh water. For the first time in many weeks, he felt light in his heart. His fight with the HOA had not been easy, but it had shown the people the truth. He was not their enemy. He was a man who had been wronged and who had fought back with courage. Yet Ravi also knew the story was not finished. The HOA had apologized and canceled his fine, but power is like a shadow. It hides for a while, but it never truly disappears. Kamala and her board would still want control. They would still search for ways to make the rules heavy again. Ravi had to make sure they never returned to their old habits. In the weeks that followed, the community changed. A new system of meetings began, where all residents could attend and vote on new rules. The board no longer decided alone. People spoke with freedom, sharing ideas and challenging bad decisions. It was not always easy. Voices rose and disagreements filled the air, but it was honest. It was fair. And for the first time, people felt they had power in their own hands. Ravi was invited to these meetings many times. Some treated him like a leader, but he always shook his head. "I do not wish to lead," he said. "I only wish to live fair." Still, his words carried weight, and people listened when he spoke. One evening, after a long meeting, Kamala approached Ravi. Her face no longer carried the sharp pride it once had. She looked tired, almost human in her weakness. "You won," she said softly. Ravi studied her for a moment. It was never about winning. It was about justice. Kamala sighed. "Do you know what it feels like to lose control? To watch people who once respected you now look at you with anger." "Yes," Ravi said calmly. "I know what it feels like to be powerless. That is why I stood up. You treated me that way. You treated all of them that way. Now you know how it feels." Kamala looked down. For the first time, she had no reply. She walked away quietly, leaving Ravi with his thoughts. Life in the town slowly grew normal again, but the story of Ravi and the dam spread further than he expected. Newspapers picked it up, calling it the man who bought the dam. Some writers made him a symbol of resistance, while others painted him as a dangerous man who used water as a weapon. Ravi ignored them all. For him, this was not about fame. It was about living without fear. One morning, Ravi received a letter. It came from a nearby town, where another group of residents struggled with their own strict HOA. They asked him for advice. They wanted to know how he had stood up, how he had changed things. Ravi read the letter carefully. A small smile formed on his lips. His fight had not just changed his community. It had given hope to others, he wrote back, keeping his words simple. Do not be afraid. Stand together. When you are right, do not bow down. They may have rules, but you have strength. Do not fight with hate. Fight with fairness. As the days passed, Ravi began spending more time at the dam. It had become more than just a weapon in his fight. It was a symbol, a reminder that power can shift, that one person can stand against many if he has truth on his side. Sometimes he sat on the rocks, watching the water rush out through the gates, feeding the lake. Other times he walked along the top of the dam, feeling the cool wind on his face. In those quiet moments he felt peace. One evening, Aaron joined him at the dam. The sun was setting, painting the sky in orange and pink. They stood together watching the reflection in the water. You have done something great, Aaron said. The people respect you now. Ravi shook his head. Respect is not what I wanted. I only wanted freedom, Aaron smiled. But sometimes freedom brings respect with it. They stood in silence for a while. Then Ravi spoke again. Do you think the HOA will ever try to rise again? Aaron shrugged. Perhaps. Power never sleeps for long. But now the people know their strength. If the board tries again, the people will stop them. Ravi nodded slowly. Then my fight is finished. The days turned into weeks, and the community settled into a new balance. The lawns grew green again, the flowers bloomed, and children's laughter filled the air. The lake sparkled under the sun, no longer just a decoration but a symbol of freedom and unity. People often told the story of what happened. Parents told their children, neighbors told newcomers, and visitors left with the tale in their mouths. It was not just a story of a man who shut off the water. It was a story of courage, fairness, and the power of standing tall against injustice. One afternoon, Ravi walked past the park and saw the same boy he had once spoken to, the boy with the toy boat. This time the boy was smiling as his boat floated across the water with ease. When he saw Ravi, he waved happily. Thank you, sir, the boy shouted. Ravi waved back, his heart warm. In that small moment, he felt everything had been worth it. At night, when he sat by his window, Ravi thought back to how it all began. With a simple fishing trip, a heavy fine, and a decision to fight. He smiled to himself. Life had strange ways of testing people. Some bent under the weight, but others stood firm. He had chosen to stand firm, and because of that, not only his life, but the life of an entire community, had changed forever. The dam stood strong under the stars, holding back the river, guarding the lake, and reminding all who lived nearby of one simple truth. Power does not belong only to those who claim it. Power belongs to those who have the courage to use it for fairness, and so, Ravi's story came to an end not with noise or conflict, but with calm water, green fields, and a community that finally understood what it meant to live free.